If you've been a retro game enthusiast for some time, you're likely aware of hardware name changes and at times, design changes to suit different regional needs while maintaining identical functionality. Some examples include the original NES versus Famicom, the original Master System versus the Mark III, and Mega Drive versus Genesis, to name a few. It's somewhat expected that, region locks aside, you'll be getting the same experience, if only under a different name or form factor. It's that expectation which has enthusiasts collect controllers from different regions in pursuit of a slightly different color scheme or form. There is one accessory, however, that bucked this trend. This is Retro Impressions, the Sega Mouse. The Sega Mouse was first announced in 1992, 6 months after the release of the Super Famicom mouse and its marquee pack-in title, Mario Paint. Speculation from the West assumed Sega was jumping on board Nintendo's train by trying to emulate their success. But that really doesn't appear to be the case. The Sega Mouse was announced in addition to a number of other accessories, including the 6-button gamepad, Mega CD Karaoke, and Sega Tap, which is the Mega Drive's official 4-player adapter. Sega was rather specific about the reason for releasing the mouse. They wanted to bring PC games home, and realized the standard controller wasn't getting the job done. Part of the announcement centered around what could certainly be considered their primary focus, a partnership between Sega and Falcom, who is best known for their Ys series. The Sega Mouse was intended to be a clear signal to consumers that a concentrated effort was being made to bridge the gap of accessibility between computers and home consoles. They would place a particular focus on supporting games that were uncomfortable to play using a gamepad. So, not only would the Sega Mouse tackle computer games including adventure titles and RPGs, it would also come equipped with a unique feature. For compatible games, the Sega Mouse could be used as a trackball. An internal gyro automatically sensed the mouse orientation and switched the axis polarity accordingly. The ball even acted as a clickable button representing C on the control pad. The A and B buttons were assigned to the 2 buttons on the face of the mouse. The trackball feature was hyped, as was the first compatible game to feature it, Marble Madness. The Sega Mouse released on April 23, 1993, and did so with Panic, the only official game supporting it. However, other games were already on the shelf with mouse support. Though they made no mention of it, it wasn't advertised, and as of this video, compatibility still remains a topic of debate. While it's really hard to pinpoint the exact release date for regions outside of Japan, an article printed in late 1993 for the January issue of Sega Magazine talked about how it was already on store shelves in the European region. In North America, it gets a bit harder as I can only locate ads for it starting in late 1994, and no articles discussing the release itself. With the European release, it was the same mouse with new colors and packaging, but when it came to North America, the product shipped was called the Mega Mouse, and it was something entirely different from the Sega Mouse. Gone was the ability to flip it over for trackball mode, the C button was removed from the ball and assigned to a dedicated button on top, there was now a start button, and most unique of all, while the Sega Mouse was designed for use with a controller in port 1 and the mouse in port 2, the Mega Mouse was designed for use in port 1, and due to the inclusion of a start button, no longer required a control pad. The Mega Mouse never released outside of North America, and the Sega Mouse remains exclusive to Japan and Europe. So what games are compatible with the mouse? What games are designed for the trackball? Does the mouse make compatible games more enjoyable? And which of these are accessible to an English-speaking audience? We're going to look at them all, along with a couple games on the 32X, including one that's yet to be released. So let's get started. Hold up, that's not quite accurate. The unreleased game was Doom Resurrection, and it did release on October 17th, 2021. This video just took a while to make, so with that out of the way, back to you. It's important to note that games had to be specifically programmed to work with the mouse. And as it was announced in 1992, there were no games compatible prior to that year. So if you're wondering if Art Alive is compatible, the answer is no. It was released in 1991. Let's get the trackball games out of the way. Sega promised prior to the Sega Mouse launch, trackball games would be coming, starting with Marble Madness. Now, this seems to really confuse people because they hear Marble Madness is compatible, so they import the mouse from Japan and it doesn't work. Did they scrap it from the North American release? No. The answer is a bit more wild. Marble Madness was originally released in 1991 by Electronic Arts, who held the distribution rights at this time. In fact, it appears they held those rights for a few regions, but not in Japan. Marble Madness was an Atari game, and Atari decided to do their own port under their Tengen brand for the one region they held. So kind of like Tetris on the NES, Marble Madness on the Mega Drive has two separate ports of an identical game by two different developers. EA's Marble Madness released in '91, and Tengen's Marble Madness released in August of 1993, which contained trackball support and remains exclusive to Japan due to licensing rights. While I can't test the trackball, Marble Madness can be played with the Mega Mouse, and it's a better experience for it. If you're a fan of this game, the Tengen version is certainly worth looking at, though I'm not a big enough fan to say which is the superior one. Populous 2 is a god sim created by Peter Molyneux for the Amiga and released in 1989. The game was extremely popular, and thus a sequel was released in 1991 with a port to the Mega Drive in 1993, released exclusively in Europe. Playing it left me a bit perplexed, as I can't figure out what exactly the developer intended regarding mouse support. It doesn't claim to support it on the box, yet it does. It's just awkwardly implemented in the default setting. The vertical axis is inverted, so it's like flying a plane where down is up and up is down. It's not intuitive to use, and there seems to be a near unanimous consensus that this is broken or an unfinished feature. However, that is not the case. This is the only game on this list that I can think of which allows the user to invert the X or Y axis, and it's another oddly implemented feature, being it's kind of hidden. I couldn't confirm if guidance was given to the user, as I don't own a physical copy of the manual, so I reached out to my friend Dave, who runs the Zilog and Moto channel, to see what exactly is in the manual and if anything might help the user outside of trial and error.
Hi, Dave here. A few details to fill in. There's no mention of mouse support on the box because there's literally no room for it, as with it being a Euro release, it's attempting to support 8 different languages. However, the manual itself, this massive book here that actually warps the case, it's so big, actually does have lots of references to controlling the game via the Sega mouse along with the standard controller. But in an odd twist, the manual refers to the Sega mouse as the Sega Micro Trackball instead. Based on this, Bullfrog Productions was definitely expecting users to play the game using the Sega mouse, but in trackball mode, and as a result, if you're trying to play the game with the mouse in standard mouse mode, it might be slightly awkward by default. The Y-axis flip option that Janou refers to is specifically not called out, however it's not too surprising given the nature of this manual. Usually the PAL manuals tend to get straight to the point due to the aforementioned language issue, and especially in a game like Populous 2, with tons of details to cover, a smaller but important option like that would be left for the player to figure out.
Populous 2 was planned for release in North America too, but under the name Wrath of God. A prototype build of that game has even been dumped, so I checked it out to see if the mouse support had changed in any way, and it's identical to the European version. So here's a tip. You first have to start an actual game. Then in the bottom right corner, you'll see a globe. Click on that, and you can cycle through the different mouse control options. Overall, this is 100% a game you'll want to play with the mouse, and once you got it set up, it's one of the better implementations out there. Body Count is an on-rails shooter which was never released in North America or Japan. It was developed by Probe and may be their best original work. I can't recommend it enough, but do I recommend this with a mouse or a controller? It's not bad with a controller, though you'll feel unable to move fast enough at times. This is fixed with a mouse though. I easily breezed through the first few levels, which is certainly a struggle with the gamepad. I could almost always grab the power-ups too, something I typically struggled with, so this experience is greatly improved with the mouse. This game was not designed for the Mega Mouse, so you must start it with your mouse in the Player 2 port. You can start a single-player game or a two-player game this way. It also has light gun support, which I hear is quite good if you're into that. For this game alone, I recommend you get a mouse. Oh, and the game, if you don't already own it. StarBlade is a fascinating case as I couldn't get it to work, but I have both the Japanese and US versions, and the Japanese package clearly shows it supports both the XE1AP, which I discussed in my History of Analog Controllers video, along with the Sega mouse, making it the only game to do so. However, when it came to testing the mouse in both versions, I had zero luck. So I reached out to a friend who is deep into the Sega CD library and asked them to check their copy and see if the problem was on my end, or if the game just didn't support it. That friend is Vampire Mike over at Sega CD Universe, who pointed me to a discussion from 2017 regarding issues with this game and mouse support involving emulation. It turns out the game does support the mouse, but it's rather particular and hard to get running on real hardware. This is due to a dedicated protocol used by the mouse to communicate with the software so it can determine what, if any, controller is there. Like the 6-button gamepad, the mouse contains a microcontroller to keep track of the position and button presses, which can cause latency issues upon the system's initial boot if the game doesn't follow the proper protocols. In short, these early games don't give the mouse enough time to respond that it's indeed there before the software times out the ability to detect it. Why this causes issues on different systems in different ways is currently unknown, but it's clear that games that only work sometimes on some systems all have the same issue. They don't follow the proper protocols Sega put in place for detecting if a mouse is present. So back to StarBlade. Mike sent me a video showing that this on-rail shooter is indeed compatible, and he was able to get his North American version working with his mouse. But there's no guarantee you'll be lucky like Mike. This brings us to Rise of the Dragon. It seems that nearly 30 years after its release, the community is still debating if it is indeed mouse compatible. The game is a point-and-click adventure and is clearly suited for a mouse-based experience. However, there's no mention of it on the packaging, in the manual, or in-game, in any version or region. I've seen it mentioned as being compatible in some internal Sega documents about the mouse prior to its release, but I couldn't get it to work. The game released on the Mega CD in Japan in late 1992 prior to the Sega mouse, and in the US in 1993, distributed by Sega, followed by a second release for the Sega CD, this time by Crystal Dynamix sometime in 1994. There appears to be some minor alterations between the two US releases too. Some are instantly noticeable, including the intro splash screen and removing the ability to skip cutscenes. Sega again made it clear during the Sega Mouse release in 1993 that this game was supported, making it the first game released for their device. But was that really the case? Looking online, people list it as being compatible, but when testing it, no one seems to be able to make it work. So I tried it on a Mega CD 1 and 2 using real games and real hardware without any luck. After some research, I found a decade-old video reporting to show the mouse working with the game, but the video is kind of odd, heavily edited, and commenters seem to believe it was a practical joke as no one else can get it to work. However, there's 3 versions to test, so which one was being played here, and what version were these other people playing? Was it possible the support was added to the later release? Jump cuts make it hard to say for sure if the video was a fake, and the info included is sparse, but after watching it a few times I was positive that the version being used was the 1994 Crystal Dynamix release. So I put it through the paces, and after failing to get the mouse working, finally wrote it off as bad information. However, this was early on in my research, so after the StarBlade situation, I decided to return to Rise of the Dragon, and again enlisted Mike from Sega CD Universe to help verify if the game did indeed support the mouse. And it does! I have since confirmed this to be an identical situation to StarBlade, where the proper protocols were not followed, and getting it to work is truly luck of the draw. As far as my hardware and the Sega mouse goes, I appear to have some terrible luck. Wacky Worlds is like an interactive sticker book from the 90s. Drag and drop pictures, change their colors, and do other things that would entertain a child of that era. The mouse certainly makes the experience better, and the game was even packaged with a Mega Mouse in the US, though you could also purchase one by itself. It's interesting to look at for a few moments, but really there's not much meat on this bone. The game also received a release in Brazil, though that region never received a mouse, so they were forced to use a controller instead. Jimmy White's Whirlwind Snooker greatly benefits from the mouse, and that's because it's more of a pool game where you adjust levers and sliders for a robot that's playing pool for you. If you watch this channel, you likely know this is the worst pool experience offered on a 4th generation Sega system. And though the mouse improves the experience, it's still not worth playing. One interesting bit is the game requires a mouse in controller port 1 for a single player game. And though I can't test it, the game appears to support 2 mice, if you can con someone into playing. It's also the only Sega mouse game that officially uses port 1. Cannon Fodder for the Mega Drive was only released in European and Australian regions. It's a team-based shooter, closer to a top-down run-and-gun than something tactical. It's certainly a good game made better by its mouse support. I won't chat too much about gameplay as you can see the video, and if it looks interesting, you may just enjoy it. This requires the mouse in the second player port and adds the ability to move while firing, something that's not possible with the standard controller. It's not surprising that nearly every experience designed for a mouse is made better with mouse support. But when a game loses functionality with a controller, there's no question about how you should play it. Cannon Fodder is on a ton of systems, and I'm not really sure this is the best way to play it or not, but this is a solid experience. Fun and Games is the first on this list to support the mouse, yet the experience is made worse for it. The game designers knew this too, as they recommended the gamepad for the actual games, which are essentially unplayable without it. Nothing here is good, emulating Mario Paint in the worst way, while tacking on 3 terrible minigames that no soul should waste time playing. As I test these games, you typically lose some or all controller support once the mouse is selected, but here, both the controller and the mouse work all the time. There's not much else to say. Lemmings 2 has mouse support. Just start it up with the accessory in port 2 and you're good to go. This is a menu-based strategy game where you use the toolbar to assign abilities to different lemmings in an effort to complete a level. While mouse support in these games is always nice, the developers did a solid job of incorporating controller support by including large detection boxes, eliminating frustration from using a digital controller to select a moving lemming. Overall, the mouse is a plus, but not a massive improvement or necessity over the controller. Nobunaga's Ambition is a period turn-based strategy game, originally released in 1986 for computers, but slowly saw ports to a number of home consoles. If you enjoy Koei games from that era, this will certainly be of interest to you. When booting up the game with a mouse in the second player port, you'll be asked to select your preferred control method by pressing a button on either the gamepad or mouse. Overall, the game is made slightly better by the mouse, but I think the comfort of sitting back in a chair with a gamepad makes it the preferred input method. Everything is on a grid, so it's quite simple to navigate with either one. Richard Scarry's Busytown is yet another children's game with mouse support. I find it rather strange that Sega felt these 2 items paired well, as I can't imagine a parent picking up a specific controller for a game that really doesn't need one. This is certainly better than Fun and Games, and if you had a kid when this was first released, you might have felt it was a solid children's experience. It really doesn't hold up well considering modern offerings though. The mouse support is rather pointless and adds nothing to the experience. If you do decide to check it out, you'll need to power on your system with the mouse in the first player controller port. Shanghai II Dragon's Eye is the only other Mega Drive game that requires the Mega Mouse to be plugged into the first controller port. This is a Mahjong title, and one of the few released in North America. I don't play Mahjong, but this seems to be a fair experience. The mouse adds absolutely nothing to the gameplay, so you'll be equally happy using either controller method from a functional standpoint. Secret of Monkey Island was clearly designed with the Sega mouse in mind for use in port 2. It's also one of the few games to actively require the control pad to access some menus, meaning you'll be using both as you play. Certainly is a welcome addition over a standard controller, considering it's a point-and-click adventure that's worth playing. It was only released in North America and Japan, and neither copy mentions supporting the mouse. American Laser released 4 games supporting the mouse, all via the second controller port, and all requiring a controller to start and pause the games. What's really odd about this is these were only released in North America, and the Mega Mouse has a start button integrated into it. So I'm not sure why this was done across the board. The games are Crime Patrol, Who Shot Johnny Rock, Mad Dog McCree, and Mad Dog 2: The Lost Gold. These are all on-rails, light gun shooters designed for the arcade, then later ported home. In most regards, these are mechanically the same game with different themes. The Mad Dog series is a western, Crime Patrol is a cheesy, police-centric crime fighter, and Who Shot Johnny Rock has a noir detective theme. With a controller, the experience in all these games is quite terrible, and not recommended. The Mega Mouse certainly makes them more palatable, but there's a noticeable disconnect in an experience designed with one control method in mind, and due to their video nature, it's nearly impossible to enjoy these any other way. There's two other issues. First off, and the larger one in my opinion, is full motion video on the Sega CD and precision gameplay. These games look terrible and it's often hard to identify what you're looking at on screen, and that's a major problem when you're required to hit something but can't seem to tell where it's at or what you're looking at. The Sega CD may be the worst system to play these kind of games on, but there's another that was built from the ground up with them in mind. That masterpiece of tech is the CDI, and every one of these games was released on that system. The final issue is the manuals all state that some older Genesis systems may not work with the Mega Mouse, something we kind of covered earlier on. However, in general, that's not accurate unless we're talking games from this particular company. With the aforementioned, I could only get Mad Dog 2 to work on both the Mega Drive and Mega Drive 2, and could only get the original Mad Dog to work on the Mega Drive 2. I had zero luck with the other games, even though I was running original software on real hardware. I again reached out to my friend Dave over at Zilog and Moto, and he also confirmed this issue on his end. There's some indication that the American Laser games were designed for the original Sega Mouse as a shonen game rather than the Mega Mouse, so likely this is another case of games not following the proper protocols. Honestly, you'll want to avoid all these on this platform as there's a ton of better options out there. For the very best system to experience these on with light gun support, you'll need the CDI. The same system that's home to the exclusive smash hit, Thunder in Paradise. Eye of the Beholder for the Sega CD is a Western RPG Dungeons & Dragons game originally designed for the PC and later ported to the Sega CD by a Japanese development team. It's your standard dungeon crawler from that era, and considering many computer RPGs have complex menus, a mouse is typically a welcome addition. Opera House, for its part, did a great job porting this game to the Sega CD by including two controller methods that allowed the user to freely move their cursor or set it to only move through the menus in a grid-like pattern. So using the controller isn't a bad option, but the mouse is certainly preferred here. Nothing special is needed to access the mouse feature, just plug it into controller port 2 and it works. It's also of note that Yuzo Koshiro and Motohiro Kawashima were brought on board to do the soundtrack, and it's excellent. Dungeon Master 2: Skullkeep, like Eye of the Beholder, is another dungeon crawling RPG with a very similar interface and identical mouse support. It certainly looks interesting, but it's a game I wouldn't play without the mouse as the gamepad support is simply awful. The interface is already very clunky, and the frustration from navigating it could make you want to break the controller. You'll really need to be into a game like this to even get started, and I feel like having a mouse here is mandatory if you have any hope of actually playing and enjoying this experience. If you're looking for a golf game for the Sega CD, Link's Golf isn't a terrible option, but there are certainly better golf games on the 32X and Mega Drive. This game supports the TV golf controller and a mouse, both of which need to be selected from the options menu before starting a game. I'm not sure this game needs a mouse, but it's there if you want it. The most interesting thing about this game is they plan to release expansion packs for it, and the feature to load them is in-game. This never happened, but it's interesting nonetheless. Mansion of Hidden Souls is quite proud of its mouse support, putting it right on the front of the packaging. I did a review for this a few years back and remember the controller being just fine. In fact, I couldn't understand why mouse support would even be needed as you're just moving around and there's zero point-and-click elements. To use the Mega Mouse, just have it in controller port 2 when starting the game. I was kind of curious why they included it here and was quite disappointed that my memory served correct. This is a game better played with the controller, as you'll move in all kinds of directions you don't want, as you're required to push the mouse in the direction you want to move, and often doing that will move you in a direction you don't want. The game is nothing special, but if you do check it out, do so with a gamepad. Well, I wasn't expecting much with my paint after the other kids' games. This was a North American exclusive, so you'll need to start with the mouse in the first controller port. The game consists of an MS Paint style free drawing section and a large digital coloring book. To be honest, I kind of got pulled in coloring different images and experimenting. It's a bit addictive, and the mouse support is greatly appreciated here. If you like messing around, it's certainly the best of this style experience. I'm not sure if Panic was made because of the Sega mouse, but it was the one game released alongside it, the first game to publicly acknowledge compatibility, and was used to promote the device. It's really hard to explain what exactly this game is, as one could argue it's not much of a game. You essentially click things on the screen to interact with them. It's almost like you have a choice, but not really. This is limited, and most things will result in something silly happening, with only an option or two progressing you to a new area. If you have a mouse in the Player 2 port, it will work after booting the game, but I can't imagine using a mouse to play this. There's zero advantage, the game is extremely basic, and the controller does just fine. If Sega was hoping for a shining example of why people needed a mouse, Panic wasn't the game to accomplish that task. Releasing this as the sole supporting launch title seems like a missed opportunity. So what about games that support it but are essentially inaccessible to a Western audience? Let's have a look. Tenbu Mega CD Special is an interesting game to start this list with. The mouse is supported via the second player port, however it's so complex, I really couldn't figure out how to get into the game. There's a ton of full motion video, and the game even came with a dedicated standalone CD soundtrack. The menus are complex and the mouse is a welcome addition in navigating them. Janou Touryumon uses the second controller port for the mouse. It's another Mahjong game, but there's certainly a language barrier here. If you fully understand these games, you may get lucky enough clicking around on the main screen to access something playable. On a side note, the music is really nice, so you could always toss it on for that. Lord Monarch supports the mouse via the second player port. The game looks really nice and appears to be a strategy game. It's also of note that while the mouse was intended to support a ton of Sega Falcom projects, this is the only one to ever release with that intended support, making their partnership a bust. Nobunaga no Yabou is a sequel to the prior mentioned Nobunaga's Ambition, but this one never received a release outside of Japan. Oddly enough, it did receive a release on both the Mega Drive and Sega CD, and both have mouse support. Koei strategy games from this era often have a steep learning curve and tremendous amounts of text. So much so I couldn't even figure out how to start the game with this one. Might and Magic 3 Isles of Terra received a Japanese exclusive port to the Mega CD. The packaging indicates mouse support, but I couldn't figure out how to activate it, possibly due to the language barrier or bad protocols. This is certainly not an import-friendly game, and that's okay, as we have a ton of other modern-day options if you want to play it. Shin Megami Tensei for the Sega CD, not being ported to an English-speaking region, is one of the biggest disappointments of the platform in my opinion. The mouse works by plugging it into the second player port, nothing else is needed. This is an incredibly popular series that would eventually have a spin-off called Persona, which remains one of my favorite series of all time. I really couldn't get far enough into it to see how the mouse fares against the controller, but my guess is it's a plus considering the nature of this game. Sim Earth received a Japanese exclusive release on the Mega CD and is quite inaccessible to anyone not already familiar with the interface. Further, I couldn't get the mouse to work, but Sega confirmed that this game would support it in their press release announcing the mouse and games that would ship for it. Of note, no mention of the mouse is contained on the package, and likely it suffers from a protocol issue similar to StarBlade. The Laughing Salesman is another Japanese exclusive for the Sega CD. Again, if the mouse is in the second port, it just works. The game is described as a visual novel with choose-your-own-path elements. It's based on a popular manga and supposedly retells the story from the first 3 anime episodes. I had it on for a while and saw little gameplay. It was mostly just a show. I think with these Japanese exclusives, they did something right, as this is another game where the mouse just works if it's plugged into the second player port. Yurisei Yatsura, Dear My Friends is another point-and-click adventure game that was well received when released. There's even been some work done to translate this game. So, on to the final segment. While I don't want to discuss the full catalog of homebrews and unreleased games that support the mouse, I did want to look at some work being done on the 32X, as there was an effort being made to support the mouse on real hardware rather than strictly focusing on emulators. My understanding is that there is 2 games that support the mouse, Wolfenstein 3D and the yet-to-be-released port of Doom Resurrection. The mouse support code was created by Chili Willy and first used in the 32X port of Wolfenstein 3D. The game requires the mouse in port 2 and a controller in port 1, and while it's fully playable with the mouse alone, you can also use the controller for added features such as the map, which is assigned to the mode button. Overall, it's a solid game and the mouse support is a welcome addition. The final game is Doom Resurrection, and it's one of the most impressive on the entire list. The footage you're looking at is from my original 32X, purchased on launch day in 1994, and it looks incredible. This game is currently in the works, and depending on when you're watching this, may or may not be available for download. The project is being headed by my friend Victor, with heavy involvement from Chili Willy, so of course it also contains the much desired mouse support. How is it? Phenomenal, and the mouse functions in a very unique way. The buttons are used to attack, cycle weapons, and use items, an identical setup to Wolfenstein 3D. Where it's different is the mouse itself is used to turn direction but not move. This is left to the controller's D-pad, making the experience extremely close to that hard-to-nail mouse and keyboard effect. There's no officially released 32X games that have mouse support, but seeing games like this ported to the system while supporting peripherals that are never discussed is quite awesome, and hopefully we see future aftermarket games include support for it as well. If you're interested in keeping track of the Doom Resurrection project, I'll have links in the description box below. Massive thanks to Victor for discussing the 32X with me, and to Mike and Dave who did additional testing and submitted footage for this video. A video of this scope wouldn't be possible without their help. I'll have links in the description box below so you can check them out. That's it for now, and until next time, thank you for watching Retro Impressions.
I shouldn't have insulted you with my terminology. You might have left my voice in. Vampire Mike with a Y, VAMPYRE MIKE, from Sega CD Universe. The mouse does not work with Shining Force, Shinobi.